Hello, I'm Melody Ann. Welcome to Author Nation Interviews. This is your go-to place for elevating your nonfiction author journey. And I'm thrilled to have you with us today. In this episode, we are going to be talking about something I think we all face, or most of us anyways, imposter syndrome. So if you're feeling like you don't belong, hang out because you're in the right place. As part of the vibrant Author Nation community, you gain access to a wealth of resources. You can find some of them at authornation.online, from writing and planning right through to marketing. So let me introduce our guest. Serena Chu has been a personal transformation coach for over 25 years. After working in the corporate worlds of accounting and investment banking. Talking about imposter syndrome, I can imagine. With qualifications and certifications as long as her arm, she had always intellectually knew she was capable, but never felt good enough. I think a lot of us can relate. Instead, she felt ashamed for not being as successful as everyone thought she was. It was only after getting to the other side of imposter syndrome that she recognized how assured she felt. She found her voice, and now she shares insights and wisdom in her book, Letting Go of Imposter Syndrome. Let's welcome Serena. Hi, Serena. How are you today?
Hi, Melody Ann. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let's dive in. So, your book, I'm very excited about this. Your book, Letting Go of Imposter Syndrome. This is a pervasive issue. So many of us face, especially in the author world. Who am I to write a book? So, what inspired you to write this book?
That's the proverbial question. Really, there wasn't any one moment that I would call an epiphany. I suppose the story sort of goes back to, as you already said in the introduction, I suffer from imposter syndrome. But interestingly enough, I didn't so much feel it in the corporate world. It was triggered hugely for me after I left, when I went to set up my own coaching business. So that's an interesting thing. But when on looking back, I can see that there were traits even from when I was, very young, as I went through school, and then there were elements of it as I went through the investment banking industry. And I remember there was one time when there was a bit of a restructuring that happened at work, and I ended up being promoted, and I was to report directly to the chief executive at the time. And I remember saying to my partner then, the only reason I got that was because I happened to be there. So that's the thing about imposter syndrome, right? It's always sort of putting the reasons outside of yourself. Well, anyway, when it got triggered for me in a really big way, I didn't know it was imposter syndrome. So I tried all the big things. I tried the affirmations, I tried the fake it till you make it, and none of it worked. But over time, I did discover that there were certain things that did begin to work for me. And as I sort of worked with clients, I discovered that it also worked for them. But even at that time, I really wasn't aware of imposter syndrome at that time. And then roll forward to sometime last year. I suppose I should back up. I did find out about imposter syndrome sometime after that, but I kind of dismissed it and really didn't think very much about it. And then you roll forward to sometime last year, and I was on YouTube, as one does in spare time, and I was just looking around, and I happened to see this video, and it was about people who were self-publishing and publishing on Amazon. And this intrigued me because I had always been interested in book publishing. And when I first set up my coaching business, I wrote a home study program. This is, going back to 1999, 2000. I wrote my own home study course, and I really wanted to get into publishing stuff at that time, but it wasn't so easy. And truth be told, now I recognize on looking back, I had all these hang-ups around marketing. I knew I had the hang-ups then, but I didn't know that it was because of imposter syndrome. So as I was looking, watching this video and just being curious about it, imposter syndrome somehow came into my awareness, and it just kept coming up again and again. So I thought, oh, okay, let's just look into this. And as I did, I began to realize that this was a subject that I knew intimately. This is a subject that I really, really had a deep relationship with in the past. Uh, and it was really only then that I realized, okay, I really have some value here in my insights, in my knowings from the experiences that I've had and in the work with my clients. And that's when I thought, okay, maybe I could just, write a book. But again, I had no agenda with it. And I thought, let's just take the next step. Let's just get all your thoughts out. Let's just put it on a sheet of paper. And by the time I'd finished that, it was something like 20,000 words, to my surprise. And I went, okay, well, let's just turn it into a book and see what happens next. So that's how it came about.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. So I want to dig into imposter syndrome a little bit, uh,
Mm.
because I want to talk about what it actually is. You feel self-doubt, and maybe you are trying to, you're not perfect enough, and maybe, you procrastinate, but some of these are symptoms, and some of these are like manifestations, but there's got to be an underlying cause as well. Can you kind of pull that apart for me?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And when imposter syndrome was first uncovered, if you like, it was called imposter phenomenon. And it was thought to be a phenomenon because typically people who experience it are already very, bright and capable and able to do their thing, and often high achieving individuals too. And yet they had this mismatch. They just somehow could not see their own ability. And there are three elements, I suppose you could say, that tends to always be present with imposter syndrome. The first is that the individual tends to feel or think that other people see them to be either more successful or more capable or more able than they truly are. And then as a result of that, they have this, they're afraid, they have this underlying fear that then they'll be found out, because then people will discover, well, actually, you're not as smart as, we thought you were in the first place. And that then manifests into all these behaviors, coping behaviors like procrastination, perfectionism, as an example. And the third element is that they will tend to put their successes down to something other than themselves. So they'll say things like, oh, I was only lucky as I did, like, oh, I only just happened to be there. They'll put it down to luck, or they'll put it down to some other external factor, like, oh, it had nothing to do with me. I remember when I was early in my coaching and this showed up for me, it was always a case of no matter how well my clients had done, no matter how much great feedback they gave me, inside, I would always say, yeah, but they would have done it anyway, regardless of, any of the work that we had done together. So there's this failure to internalize their successes, and a failure to, and the discounting of their successes. Yeah. So that's how imposter syndrome shows up. And it does have a lot in common with the symptoms like self-doubt, which may not necessarily be imposter syndrome.
Right. But sometimes they are, they coexist, or,
Yes. Yeah.
imposter
And
show up
typically,
as.
yes. So typically, I should say that those symptoms, it's called a syndrome because a syndrome is when we have a cluster of symptoms that show up at the same time. But there's not necessarily any one thing that's the thing. And with imposters, actually, I have a diagram which I don't know whether I can show you. I might not be able to see it. Can you? I don't know. Can you see that at all?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you might not be able to read the detail, but the thing about it is that what I want to illustrate is that right in the middle here is really our self-perception. It's how we think about ourselves, right? And then that is really driving. I suppose start here first. That's really driving our action and behavior. The things like perfectionism, procrastination, overworking, or holding ourselves back. But it's also driving our thoughts. Self-judgment, making assumptions, the self-doubt, thinking that you're not good enough, and driving the self-talk. And it also drives what I've got here, which is biochemistry and feelings, the feeling of anxiety, which can manifest then in poor sleep, the feeling of overwhelm or stress. But what's interesting is that all of these feed one another. So they're all intertwined. So as you can imagine, you think you're not good enough. And that's going to feed you feeling into your feeling lousy about yourself. That's going to feed into maybe, say, procrastination or perfectionism. And then whatever result comes from that feeds back into the thoughts. But they all feed one another, and then also feed the self-perception. But the underlying cause is, what is it that you are thinking about yourself that's driving all of that?
Right, right. No, that makes perfect sense. And I just,
True.
you said something about, I just assumed I got it because I was there. And I noticed that a lot of people have this or behavior, right? I either got it because I was there or I got it because I was the right person. And it be and. I happened to be in the right place at the right time and I was the right person, therefore I was hired.
Exactly. And you see, and that's the thing in imposter syndrome, you're never the right person.
Yes,
Because
yes,
there's that mismatch between how you see yourself and who you really truly are. And in
right.
fact, people often see, see who you are or can see through that, but you don't see it yourself because you're not internalizing any of that, because you're always putting it down to luck or putting it down to, the team did it or my client did it. It had nothing to do with me.
Exactly, exactly. If you'd like to learn more about Serena, you can find more about her at serenachu.com. That is her website. Now let's talk a little bit about in the book, you talk about the importance of the curious observer. So kind of watching yourself and watching your thoughts. Could you elaborate on this practice a bit?
Yes, sure. So I sort of touched a little bit on this thing that I call the inner thinking piece, where all the elements feed one another, the self, whatever it is you're thinking about yourself, your self-perception, your self-talk, the doubts and all that. It's all feeding everything, and it's going along this path. And it's really going along, how it's playing out is really, based on, if you like, internal programs that we are running. So our mind is really incredible because it really creates these internal shortcuts, if you like, so that we don't have to try and think about everything from scratch. So as an example, once you've seen a snake and you know what a snake is, you might, and I used to live in Australia where poisonous snakes were the thing. So even now, back in the UK, if I see a piece of rope out of the corner of my eye, I do this little jump because I think, oh, could that be a snake? And that's because our mind is always trying to keep us safe. And so it's always running these shortcut programs that we don't have, because sometimes we just don't have the time to consciously think things through. So it's making all these relationships. And many of these programs were installed, if you like, when we were very, very young, before we could really even discern or start to consciously think about things. So I want to give you an example here. Something like, okay, don't talk to strangers, right? We're told as little children, don't talk to strangers, which is a very valid thing because, of course, at that age, we don't have the ability to think things through and go, is this safe or not safe? Should I be talking to this person, or does this person kind of feel a bit strange and maybe it's not so good for me to talk to this person? But now that we are adults and our circumstances have changed, we are put in situations where we do have to talk to strangers, if you go to a networking event, for example. But so many people feel uncomfortable about networking because there's that old program that's running in the background that's saying, you've got to keep yourself safe, so you've got to keep yourself away, right? And so because these are all running automatically in the background, we tend to react rather than really consciously thinking things through. And that's why when we're an observer, it's really being an observer of how we are automatically reacting to things. And that then gives us some kind of feedback in terms of what's really going on inside. And then we can take a step back and say, okay, is this really truly valid still for us? Is this truly serving us in the way that it was meant to when we originally picked up that conditioning during our very early years? And that's why I think it's good to be the observer of your thoughts and be the observer of what comes up when you just react.
Yeah, yeah. And once you hear your own thoughts and you understand your inner dialogue and those programmed kind of reactions, you can change your self-talk, right?
Yes, totally, you can. And this is I think this is a very common topic. Many people, I think most people, certainly most people listening to Author Nation will definitely understand about the whole concept of self-talk. And it's interesting because self-talk, 9 out of 10 times, until we have learned to change it around and change that inner, those inner programs, 9 out of 10 times is negative. It says all the horrible things that you wouldn't even say to your best friend, right? But the interesting thing about self-talk is that we tend to believe it. And we can identify it. And with imposter syndrome, we've identified it to the level that we begin to think that's what we are, which is why we turn it on ourselves and we think that we're not good enough, right? So with self-talk, one of the common things that is often talked about is we should reframe our self-talk. Instead of saying things like, "Oh, I'm a terrible writer," we should turn it around and say, actually, I'm really great at writing." But then this voice comes up that makes us feel icky inside, because this voice is going, "Yeah, well, who are you trying to kid? Like, are it feels like we're lying to ourselves, right?" So one of the ways is to change that relationship to the self-talk by understanding that the self-talk will always be there, but we can distance ourselves from it somewhat. And instead of having it be self-talk, to change it to mind talk. And what I mean by this is, when we have those the self-talk words that come up, like "I'm no good," or sometimes we change it to will come up as "you're no good," to actually say, well, "Oh, isn't that interesting? My mind thinks I'm no good." So you begin to sort of distance yourself there. And I'm just wondering whether you would like to experiment with this to see how it feels. Like, is there something that you sometimes say to yourself as self-talk, which might make you feel a little bit icky?
Good question. I try to be really careful about how I speak to myself, but
Mm.
I'll say that last August I broke my leg, and I've been on this journey of self-healing, and I can walk now, but I can't run and jump, and it's been 8 months. And there is that, I do have this like, well, why is it taking you so long? Now, I was told it will take a year to 18 months to fully heal. And yet, even though the medical professionals have told me it will take a year to 18 months to fully heal, my little brain back there says, yeah, but you should be healing faster.
Yes,
Can't you
yes.
do that yet? Right? So I do have that going on at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting. I mean, had you been thinking sort of like, why am I taking so long to heal? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do it faster? We
Yeah.
tend to feel sort of like really blah about that. But when we, as you have done, when you change it to, well, oh, my mind thinks I should go faster.
Yeah.
But with that distance in between, that feeling of icky kind of just drops down a tad. And then that enables us to sort of move forward in a way where we don't feel quite as compelled to believe what the mind is thinking. And the beauty of this is that over time, as we learn to not take action on all those things that the mind is talking about, we begin to relax a little bit into ourselves. And that's when some of the, those inner thinking programs can begin to shift a little.
Yeah. I admit, though, that I have to keep reminding myself of that. And
Mm.
sometimes I'll be out with a friend, or I'll be doing something, and my friend has to remind me of it as well. I'll get frustrated. They're like, Melody, remember. Right? It's like, right, right. So it isn't something that I do once and it's done. It is something I need to remind myself of over and over and over again, to not fall into that, what's wrong with you?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what authors can do. So, authors, of all the people who face this imposter syndrome, I think authors, so many authors, especially nonfiction authors, who are you, right? No one is going to read your book. Rejection, all these things. So, can you tell us a little bit about, what's in your book that can help authors navigate this journey, and like, publish a book with more confidence rather than this fear and this imposter syndrome?
Mm. I think we've already touched on it a little bit in terms of, we've got to shift these programs. And I think once it's all about raising awareness around what's actually going on inside of us in terms of these programs running us, if you like, which may no longer be relevant. So if we back up to when we were very, very young, we really are, the first objective, if you like, or the first aim and goal that our mind has is to always keep us safe and alive. And in order to keep us safe and alive, we have to win the love and the approval of whoever it is who's taking care of us, right? Because if we don't, if they don't like us and if they don't approve of us, then they might not look after us anymore, and then our life would be in danger. And so this program continues to run in the background. We've got to be loved up, we've got to be loved, and we've got to be approved of by everyone. Otherwise, our life could be in danger, right? And so when we come to writing the book, we still have this program running that we think that, oh, if somebody doesn't like our book, we make that meaning, or somehow the mind has associated that meaning that, oh, if somebody doesn't like something we've done, we feel shame around it because now there's something wrong with me. And if there's something wrong with me, I won't be loved and I won't be approved of. And therefore, I'm not going to do the book.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's shifting that. It's understanding that really that's a disconnect there. It shouldn't be connected because the book doesn't mean that you're not loved or approved of because one individual or two individuals don't happen to like it. It just so happens that they are not on your trajectory, if you like. They're not with the same resonance as you are. And so it's understanding that then enables us to recognize that, no, there's actually not something wrong with us. And therefore, we can let go of the shame because it's that shame that then stops us from putting what we have to express out there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the vulnerability comes from.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So if you're interested in getting more information about Serena's book, go check out serena2.com. But before you go, I want, one of the things that we talked a little bit about earlier was, imposter syndrome. I think what sometimes happens is in today's world, we're so busy and we're so overwhelmed that being self-aware becomes incredibly difficult. And I know that you have a little ebook about decluttering your mind. And I think that, before we hit the issues around, imposter syndrome, I think we have to make space for ourselves to be able to pause, to think, to just not have so much in our brain that we can't even become self-aware. Can you tell us a little bit about declutter your mind?
Yeah, totally. We carry so much around in our minds, right? So we carry around the to-do list. We carry around the long to-do list, and what I mean by that is the thing that I need to do next month or next year. We may carry that around in our heads. We try and remember, oh, it's so and so's birthday tomorrow. Not only that, there's also all the other things which are taking up energy and draining our energy overall, which also takes away from our ability to think clearly, which are things like, that pile of magazines that I've been meaning to sort out for the last 6 months. It drives me nuts that tap in the in the pantry is still dripping. It drives me nuts that I haven't really already descaled the shower head in the bathroom. All those things take up energy. And then it's also more than that. It's also certain people who take away from my energy in ways. It's so what I did was I put together some worksheets for someone to be able to take everything out of their mind and to actually put it down on a piece of paper. Because when we can sort of do that brain dump, we can then just, declutter and just clear the mind from those things like the to-do list all the way through to, what are the things that are really bugging me, like that dripping tap or like that shower head that hasn't been cleaned, and just getting it all out there. In order to then be able to go, okay, now I can just leave that be. And the interesting thing about this is once we've done it and we just put it away, whether or not you consciously do something about some of those things that have been bugging you, miraculously, when you come back a month or 6 weeks later, some of the things you can cross off the list because somehow they got done.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I have a someday list, right? And
Right.
that's where I put everything I'll probably never do, but I wish I would do, or I wish I could do. Yes, my someday list. Serena, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been enlightening. You know, we have all these things in our head about ourselves, about how other people see us, and you know, it's really good just to talk that through with you. And I hope that the audience too has enjoyed that, and they'll get some amazing takeaways from this as well. Thank you, Serena.
Thanks, Melody. I hope, people find it helpful in some way.
I'm sure they will. I've certainly found it useful. All right, thank you for joining us today on Author Nation Interviews. I hope you found this something that you can walk away and have an action that you can do even today to help you deal with imposter syndrome, which is again as Serena said, a collection of symptoms. So don't forget, visit authoration.online to start your journey to success as a nonfiction author. And I'll just remind you today that we value your feedback and we value your support. So if you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to leave a comment or review it or share it with someone who will benefit from it. I bet you know someone who deals with imposter syndrome who would really benefit from this. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you insightful content and serve the nonfiction community. So keep writing, keep creating, and keep sharing your stories with the world.